So the impetus behind this one was a particular book I read, particularly um, this book, Against the Machine by Paul Kingsnorth. Subtitle of it's On the Unmaking of Humanity. Uh, Background for this one: several years back, when I was still living with my family and we were still out in the neighborhood, the house that we lived in for the last 10, 15 years, there was talk in the town where I live of taking a lot of the farmland that was out behind our place and selling it to somebody, who knows, some kind of nameless entity that would pave it over, turn it into an industrial park. There was a lot of opposition to that, and it never ended up coming into fruition. And eventually, well, at the time, there was another proposition where some kind of people out of town some kind of investment firm of some kind wanted to take the farmland and turn it into a solar farm. And it was at that point that, as much as I wanted it to remain just farmland, I was kind of becoming willing to agree as if it was my call. But I would have rather have had the industrial park than the solar farm, because I think the solar farm, I've got all my issues with that I won't go into detail here. This will be an hour long. But I would have rather have had the industrial park, because I thought, well, at least that's providing some kind of boost to our local economy, potential jobs and all that. And long story short, that didn't end up happening either, until about, several months back at this point, where now not that same plot of land, which, by the way, from what I last heard, they are going to put an industrial park on it. Obviously, I no longer live there, so I don't have to look at it directly, I guess. But recently, a few months back, there was, from what I understand, a group out of Chicago of some kind of fat cat investors, hedge fund, jargony insert stuff here. But they apparently got getting together and they want to build a data center in the town where I live. And out of all the things that could potentially be placed in the farmland around here, this may be the last thing I would like to be put there. I think if this puts, at least before I read this book, the pecking order, puts everything into a pecking order of kind of how I would have preferred it. I would have preferred for it to remain farmland, and if that couldn't happen, probably the industrial park, and then maybe the solar farm that I very much am against, and then way down the list is your data center. But one way or another, it's looking like it's going to be on the way. It's looking like there's not really much, legally speaking, that our local government can do to keep it from being plopped down in a field near me, against the wishes of pretty much everybody in the community. There aren't many people around here that are a fan of it. But on that same note, AI and broader issues, this book, I think, kind of gets at the root of that. If you were ever going to get me, pretty like milquetoast Rand Paul conservative, to get on board with environmentalism, this is the book that would probably do it. And I think, rather than going on some long exposition about the book itself, it's kind of a jigsaw piece sort of book. It's connected a lot of things that I've read more recently, and a lot of things that I read back when I first got back into reading when I was 19, 20. It's kind of connected a lot of dots. I think this book got to the root of a problem that I was having in relation to all the data center, my thoughts around that, and all my thoughts around AI and my experiences with it, and how do I word this vaguely? The experiences of people I know with it. And it seems to me that it's a deeper rooted issue than just an environmentalist issue, that it's at some level a spiritual, like psychological, sociological issue. And this book gets really to the heart of all that and connects all those puzzle pieces in a way that I think crosses the political spectrum. And to that point, let me, I guess, kind of read some excerpts from that I think kind of exemplify that. I'm going to purposely go out of my way to not do a ton of commentary, I guess, and just read a bunch of things. And in the same way that I'm kind of connecting the dots, just leave anybody that may be watching this to connect the dots on their own. One of the things, though, that I was wanting to read was, if I can find it, this. It says, the point, I think, is to be found beneath the surface layer of politics and beneath the lower layers of nationhood, ethnicity, and culture, too. The point, as ever, is spiritual. If our nations seem hollowed out, if our countries seem to be prey for the machine, he dubs this kind of force pushing technology and progress as the machines, the reason for the title of the book. If our countries seem to be a prey for the machine, surely it is because they have no soul. If people, place, prayer, and the past are the ground upon which real culture is built, many of us today would have to look at our own countries and conclude that they have no real connection to any of these. Blame the immigrants if you like, it's always the easy option, but they didn't strip the soul out of the nations of the West. We did. Do you think you can build your country around nothing but money and then complain when people want to come in and earn some of it themselves? Again, without commentary, let me skip on to another section if I can actually get to it. Particularly this part, he's, well, I guess talking about the disconnect between kind of the natural world, and I don't mean just the earth itself, but human nature, everything that nature in the broadest possible sense of that phrase. He says this, he says, and so over the edge we went into what Nagler, this scientist he's referencing, calls the age of the binary, a consciousness which sees humanity and nature as separate, nous and ratio as separate, God and humanity as separate, a world of abstraction and dualism. The binary is, of course, the basis of computer code. The machine literally runs on binary thinking. There is no place for the news, the smartphone, the laptop, or AI. The binary is manifested in technological form. The machine is ratio, purified. In a world in which this machine consciousness is propagated to us daily through digital technology, each time we gaze at a screen, the irrational, illogical world of beauty, wild nature, and spiritual truth becomes literally impossible for us to experience, for it cannot be quantified, and therefore it does not exist. And then I want to read this last one, and past that point, I'm just kind of skim and whatever sticks out to me. I think at the end, he really gets to the crux of it, which I'm only able to skim the surface of it here. Obviously, like, I wouldn't be making a video like this if I didn't think it was worth reading. So, like, legitimately, I'd go out and read this. Where were we? He's quoting a neurologist, philosopher guy. I forget what his actual accolades are. But he's quoting him in his studies on our neurochemistry and kind of how our brain works. He says this. He says, according to McGilchrist, the brain's left hemisphere is designed to help us apprehend and thus manipulate the world. The right hemisphere to comprehend it. The left and right hemispheres seem to have very specific ways of relating to the world. The left's way is the way of certainty, manipulation, detail, the local, the familiar, the isolated, discrete, and fragmentary. Its world is fixed, decontextualized, inanimate, general, and optimistic. The right, on the other hand, sees the whole picture, notices the peripheries, and is comfortable with the new, ambiguous, circumspect, and complex. It tends to change, flow, context, the animate, narratives, the pragmatic, empathy, and emotional expressivity, and it tends towards pessimism. It should be clear enough that a full human life and a working human brain needs to encompass both of these ways of seeing, and this is indeed what the human brain is designed to do. Ideally, the brain and the McGilchrist thinking exist in a particular balance, with the left hemisphere, which sees the parts, in service to the right, which sees the whole. This is how most societies, and hence minds, in the past appeared to have functioned, including that of the pre-modern West. But something happened, posits McGilchrist, over the course of Western history. In this little part of the world, there was a revolution. At some point, or perhaps at many points, the left hemisphere, the emissary, overthrew the right, the master, and began to run the show itself. Instead of the parts being in service to the whole became diminished or dismissed by a perspective that could only see the world as a collection of parts. He gets towards kind of that point. He even says, just a little bit before that, that kind of traditionally, and maybe not entirely accurately, the left brain for the last several decades has been thought of as like the masculine way of thinking, and the right brain as the feminine mode of thinking, which is something I just wanted to throw out because I'll be coming back to that here in a second. But let me just literally, read until I find something like this that I think is noteworthy. I've highlighted like pretty much something on every page of this. This part says, the West has become an idol, some kind of static image of the past that maybe once was, but is now inhabited by a new force, the machine. The West today thinks in numbers and words, but can't write poetry to save its life. The West is the kingdom of mammon. The West eats the world and eats itself that it may continue to grow. The West knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. The West is exhausted and empty. Maybe then, just maybe, we need to let the West die. Let it die so that we can live. Maybe we need to let this concept fall away, to let it crumble so that we can see what lies beneath. Stop all the fighting to preserve something nobody can even define, something which long which has long lost its heart and soul. And I won't spend too much longer on this. I guess let me finish with this. It says, look at the world of politics, for example, and you'll soon notice that both left and right are, in the Gilchrist hemispheric terms, both very much on the left. Compare a modern skyscraper and an old cottage, or a Byzantine icon of Picasso, or consider contemporary language compared to its older equivalent, nature versus biodiversity, mothers versus chest feeders, people versus human resources. Consider countries, religions, stories, communities, or families from both right and left hemisphere viewpoints. How do they look? How do they feel? Like complex, delicate networks of relationship, or like mechanisms to be deconstructed and rebuilt at will. A lot of things, obviously, that I can't recap without making this an hour. There was a lot of things I kind of connected to and I constantly kept thinking back to as I was reading through different parts of this. Again, rather than try to weave this whole thing into one cohesive sort of through line, I'm just going to read different things that kept coming into the back of my mind as I was going through this. First of all, something that he references a ton is literally just the Bible, and something in particular parts of it that he gets to is particularly the Genesis story, which I feel stupid for not. I mean, I guess I was always aware of it, but for some reason or another, it became. I kind of took it for granted, I guess. But the whole idea that at its in its nascent state, humanity lived in a garden, and I guess particularly where was it? This part. Get to go back a little further. Oops. Yeah. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over every living creature that moves in the ground. Then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds of the air, and all the creatures that move in the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw all that he had made. It was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. And then I'm going to skip a few stanzas here. It gets to this. Now the Lord God had planted a garden in the east, in Eden, and there he put the man he had formed. And the Lord God made all kinds of trees grow out of the ground, trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food. In the middle of the garden were the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which I think parallels pretty nicely with the last passage I'd read there, with kind of parallelism he was trying to draw. I'm going to skip another little bit to this. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. And the Lord God commanded the man, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat of it, you will surely die. Again, the whole parallelism that he had just drawn. Another book, obviously my favorite book. There's a ton of stuff from here that I kind of referred back to as I was reading through that. But in particular, I think one that I think Dostoevsky was literally even making the exact same argument that he was, maybe not in the fullness of his argument, but he was thinking along those same lines. There's a passage, and I can't give context for all these, or again, it would be an hour, and that would become the focus of this. But stripped of context, there's a passage where a certain character is speaking, a certain priest. He's speaking with this other guy. This other guy says this. He says, the kind that prevails everywhere now, especially in our age, but that still hasn't ended, or its time has not yet come, because now each man tries to isolate himself more, wishing to experience life to the fullest. Meanwhile, all his efforts result in achieving not the fullness of life, but complete suicide, because instead of fullness, he falls into total self-isolation. Because in our age, all men are split up into units, each retreating into his own burrow, each one separating himself from others. He hides, conceals what he possesses, and ends up alienating himself from people and alienating others. He accumulates wealth in isolation and thinks, I'm so strong now and so secure, but the fool doesn't realize that the more he acquires, the more he sinks into suicidal impotence. Because he has become accustomed to relying on himself alone and cutting himself off from the whole, he's taught his soul not to believe in help from others, in people, or in mankind. He merely trembles at the thought that he might lose his wealth and acquire privileges. Everywhere now, human intellect is, ironically, beginning to ignore the fact that a person's genuine security lies not in his individual solitary efforts, but in the common solidarity of the people. This terrible individualism absolutely must end, and men will understand at once that they have separated themselves from one another unnaturally. There again is that word, unnaturally. Also, it's a particular bit that I felt a little called out by. Next one was from Dune, Frank Herbert. That whole balance between the natural world and specifically capitalism, I guess just to put it bluntly, is kind of a big focus of this book. There's a part, this is straight up going to spoil a fairly major point, so I guess everybody should read Dune if you haven't and plan on it. Skip a few minutes, I guess. But there's a certain part that always kind of stuck out to me. This is a book I read, I guess, about 7 years ago now while working out at the greenhouse. And in the middle of summer, it was like 95 degrees. We had a little bit of time at the end of the day where I'd done everything I needed to do and all that. And I was sitting there dying of heat stroke and reading here about somebody dying of heat stroke, which kind of added to the experience. But this particular character is their job. I did say I was going to spoil it. It's Kynes. He's this planetologist, I think they call him, and he's been sent to Arrakis with the sole purpose of taking it from this desert planet and kind of restoring it to this Garden of Eden type sort of thing, in kind of this green scientist sort of way. He ends up getting absolutely murked, and at a certain part, as he's lying out in the desert, dying under the sun, he has this passage where he keeps reflecting back to some of his early moments where his father was talking to him, and it reads kind of like this. Where was it? Where do I want to start? Oh, it says, well, I lost it again. Yeah. The masses of Arrakis will know that we work to make the land flow with water, his father said. Most of them, of course, will only have a semi-mystical understanding of how we intend to do this. Many, not understanding the prohibitive mass ratio problem, may even think we'll bring water from some other planet rich in it. Let them think anything they wish, so long as they believe in us. In a minute, I'll get up and tell them what I think of him, Kynes thought, standing there lecturing me when he should be helping me. He's fading in and out of consciousness. The bird took another hop closer to Kynes' outstretched hand. 2 more hawks drifted down to the sand behind it. Religion and law among our masses must be one and the same, his father said. An act of disobedience must be a sin and require religious penalties. This will have the dual benefit of bringing both greater obedience and greater bravery. We must depend not so much on the bravery of individuals, you see, as upon the bravery of a whole population. Where's my population now when I need it most? Kynes thought. He summoned all his strength, moved his hand a finger's width toward the nearest hawk. It hopped backward among its companions, and all stood poised for flight. Our timetable will achieve the structure of a natural phenomena, his father said. The planet's life is a vast, tightly interwoven fabric. Vegetation and animal changes will be determined at first by the raw physical forces we manipulate. As they establish themselves, though, our changes will become controlling influences in their own right, and we'll have to deal with them too. Keep in mind, though, we need only control only 3% of the energy surface, only 3% to tip the entire structure over into our self-sustaining system. Why aren't you helping me? Kynes wondered. Always the same. When I need you most, you fail me. He wanted to turn his head, to stare in the direction of his father's voice, stare the old man down. Muzzle refused to answer his demand. Kynes saw the hawk move. It approached his hand, a cautious step at a time, while its companions waited in mock indifference. The hawk stopped only a hop away from his hand. A profound clarity filled Kynes' mind. He saw quite suddenly a potential for Arrakis that his father had never seen. The possibilities along that different path flooded through him. A more terrible disaster could befall your people than for them to fall into the hands of a hero, his father said. Reading my mind, Kynes thought, well, let him. The message has already been sent to my siege villages, he thought. I'm going to skip a little bit here. The hawks circled overhead, screeching their frustration. They knew what was happening. Any desert creature would know. And I am a desert creature, Kynes thought. You see me, father, I am a desert creature. He felt the bubble lift him, felt it break, and the dust whirlpool engulf him, dragging him down into the cool darkness. For a moment, the sensation of coolness and the moisture were blessed relief. Then, as his planet killed him, it occurred to Kynes that his father and all the other scientists were wrong, and the most persistent principles of the universe were accident and error. Even the hawks could appreciate those facts. Again, without much more in the way of commentary, Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground, back to him for part 2, I guess. This one's another long one. Again, no context. It says, shower upon him every earthly blessing, drown him in a sea of happiness so that nothing but bubbles of bliss can be seen on the surface. Give him economic prosperity such that he should have nothing else to do but sleep, eat cakes, and busy himself with the continuation of his species. By the way, he's writing this in 1840, 1850, something like that. And even then, out of sheer ingratitude, sheer spite, man would play you some nasty trick. He would even risk his cakes and deliberately desire the most fatal rubbish, the most uneconomical absurdity, simply to introduce into all this positive good sense this fatal fantastic element. It is just his fantastic dreams, his vulgar folly that he will desire to retain, simply in order to prove to himself, as though that were really so necessary, that men still are men, and not the keys of a piano, which the laws of nature threaten to control so completely that soon one will be able to desire nothing but by the calendar. And that is not all. Even if men really were nothing but a piano key, even if this were... Sorry, I keep having to keep my laptop from turning off. Where were we? Even if this were proved to him by natural science and mathematics, even then he would not become reasonable, but would purposely do something perverse out of simple ingratitude, simply to gain his point. And if he does not find means, he will contrive destruction and chaos, will contrive sufferings of all sorts only to gain his point. He will launch a curse upon the world, and as only man can curse, it is his privilege, the primary distinction between him and other animals. Maybe by his curse alone will he attain his object, that is, convince himself that he is a man and not a piano key. If you say that all this too can be calculated and tabulated, chaos and darkness and curses, so that the mere possibility of calculating it all beforehand would stop it all, and reason would reassert itself, the man would purposely go mad in order to be rid of reason and gain his point. I believe in it. I answer for it. For the whole work of man really seems to consist in nothing but proving to himself every minute that he is a man and not a piano key. It may be at the cost of his skin. It may be by cannibalism. And this being so, can one help being tempted to rejoice that it has not yet come off, and that desire still depends on something we don't yet know? You will scream at me, that is, if you condescend to do so, that no one is touching my free will. All they are concerned with is that my will should of itself and of its own free will coincide with my normal interest, with the laws of nature and arithmetic. Good heavens, gentlemen, what sort of free will is left when we come to tabulation and arithmetic, when it will all be a case of twice 2 makes 4. Twice 2 makes 4 without my will, as if free will meant that. For some reason, literally, as I was reading through that, something that the sort of thing that he references in Against the Machine, that I kept referring back to. I guess this interview came out literally weeks after he wrote and published that, was the interview that I'm sure a lot of people have seen with Peter Thiel, the CEO of Palantir, and his whole, we need to transcend humanity, that transgenderism isn't enough, that we need to be able to replace every component of a human being for his goodwill, and he kind of sees himself as this benefactor of humanity, pushing progress forward in order to help everybody. I guess that kind of came to mind when I was reading through that. That brings me, I still have a few more to go. Anna Karenina, that's a main theme of this book, is the balance between the city life and everything that is associated with that, and then the rural agricultural life and everything associated with that. And one of your main characters, Konstantin Levin, he excuse me, is kind of stuck in between these two worlds. At a certain point, he's a landowner wanting to work with his peasants, and he, at one point, does just that. This passage, I guess I'll start this one. I don't have this one highlighted, so I'll start it. Where was it? I guess right here. The only thing that spoiled his pleasure, he's mowing with a scythe with his peasants. The only thing that spoiled his pleasure was the fact that his row was not good. I'll swing less with an arm and more with the whole body, he thought, comparing the row Titus, a peasant, had cut in a dead straight line with his haphazard and uneven row. Levin noticed that Titus had gone along the first row, especially quickly, probably because he wanted to test his master, and it turned out to be a long row. The next rows were easier, but Levin still had to expend all his energy so as not to fall behind the peasants. He thought of nothing and wanted nothing except to keep up with the peasants and to do the best job he could. All I could hear was the clanking of the scythes, and all I could see in front of him was the erect, receding figure of Titus, the curved semicircle of the swath, the slow ripples of the grass, and the flower tops as they bent over near the blade of the scythe. And ahead of him, the end of the row, where there would be rest. Not understanding what it was or where it came from, in the middle of his work, he suddenly experienced a pleasant sensation of coolness on his hot, sweaty shoulders. He looked up at the sky while the scythes were being wetted. A low, heavy cloud had blown over, and large drops of rain were falling. Some peasants went to put their caftans on, while others, like Levin, just shook their shoulders gleefully at being so pleasantly refreshed. They did row after row. They did long rows, and short rows, and rows with good and bad grass. Levin lost all awareness of time, and had absolutely no idea whether it was late or early. A change had begun to take place in his work now, which brought him immense pleasure. There were moments in the middle of his work when he forgot what he was doing, and it became easy. And in those moments, his row came out almost as evenly and as well as Titus's. But as soon as he remembered what he was doing, and began trying to do it better, he immediately felt the full difficulty of the work, and his row came out badly. After I was kind of going through that, it dawned on me that that's a book I need to reread. something I read really recently. Wendell that's a theme that he writes about almost primarily, is this connection between kind of living close to the earth and religion, spirituality, particularly religion. Anyway, also, before I read from this one, I should probably point out, I don't know if it's from Anna Karenina or if it's where I heard it. I can't remember where. But I remember hearing about some old Russian proverb that was something along the lines of closer to the earth, closer to God. And I think this passage in particular kind of gets to the same point. It's towards the end of the book. Again, maybe a spoiler here if this was something you were considering reading, which you probably never heard of this book, so whatever. I thought of the spring running there all the time while the Indians hunted the country, and a lot of people came and took the land and cleared it. It's still running while Grandpa's grandfather and his father got old and died, and running while Grandpa drank its water and waited his turn. When I thought of it that way, I knew I was waiting my turn too, but that didn't seem real. It was too far away to think about, and I saw how it would have been unreal to Grandpa for so long, and how it must have grieved him when it had finally come close enough to be known. Grandpa had owned his land and worked on it and taken his pride from it for so long that we knew him, and he knew himself in the same way that we knew the spring. His life couldn't be divided from the days he'd spent at work in his fields. Again, no further comment. Mikhail Lermontov, a hero of our time. This one did numbers in the back of my mind for several months after I read it, I guess last June. This part, stripped of all context, isn't nearly it doesn't hit as hard as it would normally. Another thing I think everybody should read. But it says this. It says, I walked home through the empty back streets of the village. A full red moon was just showing over the broken line of buildings like the glare of a fire. Stars shone calmly in the deep blue sky, and I was amused to think that there were once wise men who imagined the stars took part in men's petty squabbles over a patch of land or some imagined rights. Well, in fact, these lamps, which they suppose have been lit for the sole purpose of shining down on their battles and triumphs, still burn on as bright as ever, while they, with all their passions and hopes, have long since vanished, like a fire lit by some carefree traveler at the edge of a forest. Yet what strength they derive from the certainty that the heavens, with all their countless hosts, look down on them in silent but never failing sympathy, and we, their pitiful descendants, drift through the world without beliefs or pride, without pleasure or fear, except that instinctive dread that grips us when we think of our inevitable end. We can no longer make great sacrifices for the good of mankind, or even for our own happiness, because we know it is unattainable, and as our ancestors plumped on from illusion to illusion, so we drift indifferently from doubt to doubt, only, unlike them, we have no hope, nor even that indefinable but real sense of pleasure that is felt in any struggle, be it with men or with destiny. Many similar thoughts ran through my mind, but I didn't dwell on them, for I'm not given to brooding on abstract ideas. It gets you nowhere. I'd probably say this guy is the main character. The perspective this being told from is very much in the machine sort of mindset that he mentions in that book. He finishes with this. He says, as a boy I was a dreamer and dwelt with loving care on the dark and radiant images traced by my restless, eager fancy. And what did it bring me? Weariness, as though I'd spent a night wrestling a phantom, and a vague, regretful memory. In this fruitless struggle, I wasted all the ardor of spirit and firmness of will that are needed in real life. When I came into this real life, I had lived it through already in my mind and found it boring and disgusting, like reading a poor pastiche of a long familiar book. That one brings me to my second to last thing, Moby Dick. It's another big theme in here. He gets on a more philosophical level, though, and he says at a certain point this. He says, O nature and O soul of man, how far beyond all utterances are your linked analogies. Not the smallest atom stirs or lives on matter, but has its cunning duplicate in mind. I'm kind of drawing this spiritual, supernatural, metaphysical sort of connection between the natural world, human nature, and the human mind. I think I should probably say at this point then, I've noticed this sort of trend. Part of the reason I've been trying to read, things that make me feel more than think, is because I guess kind of at that same note, the machine mindset sort of thing. But it's dawned on me that, like Melville there, like Dostoevsky, I guess less so with Tolstoy, he does a better job of minding this pitfall. But male writers seem to be kind of more in tune with those like abstract, philosophical analyses, I guess. It's not completely disconnected from the right brain, but that stereotype I mentioned earlier, I think, is mostly true for most of the male authors that I've read. And I noticed female authors seem to be a whole lot better at picking up on kind of interpersonal subtleties, social dynamics, that sort of thing. Which is why I think, on the same note as Tolstoy, being able to kind of do both, I think Mary Shelley is really good at doing both. But this is for Frankenstein. It's another whole theme, although I guess in a different vein, the whole theme of nature and progress, the machine, getting to the point where it can do some kind of ungodly sorts of things. Actually, before I even read this, I should probably point out, literally as I was reading through Against the Machine, the first book, the main book here, literally as I was reading through it, I read a couple chapters and put it down, went to go eat something, came back, and was like scrolling through my phone and saw something on my Instagram Explorer where a bunch of scientists had apparently taken a fly's brain. That was something fairly simple they could do this to, and they had basically digitized it, like neuron by neuron, and because apparently with only like 3 million neurons or whatever, however many it had, they could actually tangibly do that. And they digitized it and put it into like a video game world, basically, without any coding or anything. Just transferred the physical, biological brain of it and put it into a video game, and it started moving just on its own, of its own accord, which I guess goes back to Frankenstein in 1818 here. This is another one that I haven't highlighted any part of. On some YouTube video I saw somebody point out that particularly this passage, and obviously the whole entirety of the book, but particularly this passage, there's a kind of sexual subtle undertone to all this in your narrator's kind of fascination with nature. The language that she uses to describe it here is, I'm not even sure, ironically, that I can say this on YouTube. By the way, the fact that I'm doing this on YouTube, the irony isn't lost on me. But the language that she uses to describe him bringing this collection of corpse parts to life in some unnatural way using science, she uses the language of a certain R word that I don't think I can say online. Again, I haven't highlighted, so I guess let me find it here, or I'll just start reading and hope that I come across it. It said, "No one can conceive the variety of feeling which bore me onwards like a hurricane in the first enthusiasm of success. Life and death appeared to me ideal bounds, which I should first break through and pour a torrent of light into our dark world. A new species would bless me as its creator and source. Many happy and excellent natures would owe their being to me. No father could claim the gratitude of his child so completely as I should deserve theirs. Pursuing these reflections, I thought that if I could bestow animation upon lifeless matter, I might, in process of time, although I now found it impossible, renew life where death had apparently devoted the body to corruption. These thoughts supported my spirits while I pursued my undertaking with unremitting ardor. My cheek had grown pale with study, and my person had become emaciated with confinement. Sometimes, on the very brink of certainty, I failed, yet still I clung to the hope which the next day or the next hour might realize. One secret which I alone possessed was the hope to which I had dedicated myself. The moon gazed on my midnight labors, while, with unrelaxed and breathless eagerness, I pursued nature to her hiding places," which I think is kind of a telling statement there. "Who shall conceive the horrors of my secret toil as I dabbled among the unhallowed damps of the grave, or tortured the living animal to animate the lifeless clay? My limbs now trembled, and my eyes swam with the remembrance, but then a resistless and almost frantic impulse urged me forward. I seemed to have lost all soul or sensation but for this one pursuit. It was indeed but a passing trance that only made me feel with renewed acuteness so soon as the unnatural stimulus ceasing to operate. I had returned to my old habits." I'm going to skip a bit there. "I kept my workshop of filthy creation. My eyeballs were starting from their sockets and attending to the details of my employment. The dissecting room and the slaughterhouse furnished many of my materials, and often did my human nature turn with loathing from my occupation. While still urged on by an eagerness which perpetually increased, I brought my work near to a conclusion." That part in particular, the fact that he says his human nature is kind of appalled by it, but he feels compelled to push it forward nonetheless, to bring it into being, I think is kind of the machine ideology that, Kingsnorth is pointing out in his book. I would go on trying to weave all this together, but I think I said multiple, probably too many times over the course of this, that I wouldn't do that. Maybe I'm schizophrenic and all that has no connection whatsoever. But hopefully, maybe somebody is actually watching this and actually draws the same sorts of connections that I drew, or at least you're able to trace my sort of thinking there. If nothing else, it helped me kind of put my thoughts in order. That's all I got.